Alright, so now that we have our character sculpted and painted, even if it's not at a final state of either one of those, we can always come back and tweak things, and then re-export stuff out, and la la la. You get the idea. So now we need to export this guy. So he's sculpted, he's painted. We got 10 million, trillion, bajillion polygons here. Under Z plugin, this is where we're going to do our exporting. So multi-map exporter is where we're going to pick our stuff. Before we do that though, I need to come over here to my geometry. And in my geometry, there's a spot here that says divide and it says smooth. And I just need to make sure that that smooth is on so that when it exports my UVs out, that it's smoothing my UVs. So you see smooth UVs, subdivision smooth modifier, both of those things are clicked, so that now when I export this out, he will smooth, UVs will be smooth, everything's cool. So under Z plugin, under multi-map exporter, kind of hard to see, but it's right there. This is what we can send out. Okay, so we don't need displacement maps. We could use that. We don't need vector displacement. We could use that. We're not going to get into it in this one. The normal map is a bump map, so it'll actually give us the detail of his bumpiness. Texturing, that's the coloring that we did. Ambient occlusion is the dark spots. Oops. Where his eye crevices are. Cavities are more details in the grit, the dottiness of it. The export mesh, that we actually want to take the mesh out of here. On mine anyway, I've modified the shape of it a bit from the original one. Okay, so his proportions are actually moved around a bit. Just to give you an idea, if I did something like this, that's moving that quite a bit, and that's not going to translate in just texture maps. That's where I actually have to export out a new mesh. So I'm going to say export mesh. It's probably a good idea if you did that too. So here's our map size, and we're going to stick with 4096. You can also click the button 4096. And our map border, I'm going to pull up. Okay, so that's pretty much all we have to do is we just do export mesh, these 5 right here, 4096. Export options, we can come in here and just take a look and make sure there's nothing we want to change. Mesh export, it'll let us pick which level. So I want the very first level, and I want a quad. That's cool. Cavity map, I can do some blurring on it if I needed to. Maybe just a little bit of blurring, like 3 or so. That should be fine there. 16-bit color, so it'll be a nice map. Ambient occlusion map, we have 16-bit color. We could adjust the intensity. If you come back and you look at it and say, my intensity is not where it wants to be on this, you could pull it up. Or you could pull the scan distance up. Just like the same thing that we would do inside Maya, for getting that darkness. Normal map, same thing. Which subdivision level do you want that normal map created? I'm going to pull it all the way up to that 9. Tangent, smooth UV, that's good. Now, vector displacement we're not using. Okay, so now create all maps. And where do you want this to go? I always like to make a new folder because it's going to give you like several files. So I'm just making a color folder, and I'm just going to say save it in there. So on the top of this, it's going to do all the exporting stuff. So you'll see it's going to kind of shape to the low-res version and then high-res version. Low-res, high-res. And what it's doing is taking color information from the high-res and applying it to the low-res where our UVs lie. So we'll wait. Alright, so 9 minutes, 42 seconds to do all that stuff. It may take longer, may take more time, or less time. It all depends on your individual scene. So, once we're done, this is what we get. So I have in here a material object, I only need that. We have an object, which is our exported file. And at any point we could export just the one, or if we just needed the texture, we could re-export that, or just needed the normal, or whatever, we can just export those individually. So now what I'm doing is opening up Photoshop, and I'm just waiting for it to fully open. Alright, so now that Photoshop's opened, I'm opening up, there's my cavity map right here. The ambient occlusion map is already open. It's going to open up the normal map, which is that. And then it's also going to open up my texture map. Okay, so here's all the different maps that I've created. Now, a good way to kind of make sure you're on the right page is if you look at my eyes, you can see that the texture for these are perfectly round. If you came in and they were really blocky, that means your UVs didn't get smooth, and that's not going to look right when you put it on your actual model. Okay, so like this one you can see is really blocky, but how it's going to lay out should be fine. Okay, and then you can see how that's rounded too. Now just to double check, let me go to my ZBrush. Oh, we'll deal with the other step. We'll deal with that later. All right. So here's my ambient occlusion map. I'm just going to copy this. So I'm going to duplicate the layer, and I'm going to send it over to my TM, which is my texture map. And I can close that. And I'm going to take my cavity map, which is this guy. I'm going to do the same thing. Duplicate layer, send it over to my texture map. Hit OK. I can close that. I don't need this normal map right now, so I can just close that. Alright, so here is my color, and then here is my ambient occlusion, there's my cavity map. So what I'm going to do is take these two, and I'm just going to multiply them on top of my color map. Okay, so what that gives me is just this extra sense of depth on my map. And you can see how nice this is going to look here, having this dark, so it really accents under the eyes a bit more. At any point I could adjust these too. So if I'm not liking how my ambient occlusion is looking, I can just set that back to normal, and I can just paint with my brush with white, and I could just erase it. So if I'm like, I don't want ambient occlusion on the nose, I could paint it white, and then that ambient occlusion would go away. Okay, sometimes it is a bit too much in some areas, and that's what we would want to do. Like under the chin, we may not want any of this. Now we have to stay away from the edges of these, because if we go by the edges, it's going to really screw up our other stuff. So for now, we're not at the point of tweaking it, so I'm just going to leave it the way it is. Now this is my cavity map, and you can see on here I have some scuffs and scratches that have come over, and you don't really see them on the color map. Okay, there's nothing really there. But when I turn my cavity map on, you can see those scratches and scuffs. Now the black part of this is maybe a little bit too dark, so I'm going to go into my levels for this. I'm going to just hit Control L. There we go. And I'm just going to take the black and just pull it down. Okay. And pull this further up like that. And just trying to bring these values a little bit closer in alignment to each other. Like that. There we go. So now they're closer in alignment, and then I can always take the opacity and pull this down. There we go. Okay, so here's my color map. That's what I want my color to look like. I'm going to double click my background, just unlock it, and I'm going to group all these and just call it color. So I just hit Control G and relabel that color. Okay, so that's what my color map's going to look like. I'm going to save this as I hit Control Shift S. It's thinking. I'll wait a year and a half. My source images. And I'm going to call this color, and I'm going to label it color 2 because I already have a color 1. Okay, no layers, as a TIFF. Save it. And okay. Alright, so now I'm going to save this as a PSD. It's thinking. There we go. Face, textures, PSD. Okay, with layers, save. Okay, so let me jump back to ZBrush. Still thinking. And if ZBrush comes up and says, we're trying to think here, just hit wait. Just let it wait. Sometimes it just gets stuck doing what it's doing, and then that's all you can do is just wait. Alright, so now we're in Maya, so I'm just going to go and import. thinking. It's a lot of thinking when you get to this level of working between programs, especially having Photoshop open, recording a video using Maya, and having ZBrush open. There's a lot of stuff that, it slows it down. So I'm going to import that OBJ. Now, if the OBJ isn't loaded, because we had to export the OBJ out sometimes for Maya, and sometimes that import option isn't loaded. We'll see where to set that in a second. Alright, so now you can see that if I go to my imports and I go to my source images, because that's where to put it. I'm going to put it into color. You'll see there's an OBJ, okay, because I have my OBJ exporter on. It's always thinking. So I'm importing it, and then if yours doesn't show up, I'll show you where in a second where we can turn that feature on. Alright, so here's my model that came in, and if I go to Window, Settings and Preferences, Plugin Manager, and I find the OBJ export, which is right there. That's what I need to have loaded. That way you can import OBJs into your scene. Alright, so now let's see how that texture map is going to look on our object. So I'm going to go to Lighting and Shading. Assign New Material. And I'm going to pick a Mia. Now you see the Mias aren't loaded here, so I'm going to load in Mental Ray. So I go back to my plugin manager, and go find Maya 2 Mental Ray. Now the Mia shader is not meant for like skin, but I just want to see what it's going to look like just on a flat object. So I put the Mia on, crank all the settings down, then I can see what it's going to look like. Alright, so now we're back. Mental Ray and Mia. Alright, so I'm just going to take the reflectivity off. I need reflection on them right now. I'll click on the map for color, and we will find our color. File. Alright, so I got the file on here. Now we're not going to be able to really see much inside the viewport, just because it's all, blocky and stuff. But you can see there is some detail in here. And if we hit 3, there we go. You can see how our alien guy is looking. So it doesn't look too bad. Now we want to set up some lights in here, so we'll go to create some area lights. So you can see this is the same process we've done before, just creating some lights. Now my guy is going to be from this kind of 3/4. You don't really want to get them head on or really from the side. You want to get something that looks interesting. And depending on your angle of what you're trying to show off, you have different areas to play with. In the render settings for this, we're going to set it to the 8x10 because we're going to render this out as like a magazine cover. Obviously 8x10 isn't like a magazine cover, but that's a nice size, so that's what we're going to render it out as. And we go down to the bottom, 8x10. So our width is 2400 pixels, our height is 3000 pixels. We click on the blue circle here, and we're getting cut off. So we go to View, Camera Settings, and then tell this to be vertical so that we fill the entire thing. And then we can find a good angle for this. So something like that could work. Okay, something like this could work. Okay, I had a good camera angle, kind of like this. I don't want to show the bottom. I want to cut it off before then. So something like that would look nice. All right, so now let's go to our attribute editor for the light. And we'll set up our decay rate to be quadratic. Pull this up to like 500 or so. Go to mental ray. Tell it to use the area light. I'm going to use a disk this time. It'll give me more of a rounded reflection, rounded light source. And I hit the render button. I didn't want to hit the render button. I'm hitting escape. I have to hit the render view, or the render view, and tell it that I want to use mental ray, but also I don't want to render it out at the full 8x10. I want to downsize it because obviously it's going to take forever to try to render anything like that. So I'm going to pick mental ray. Under options, test resolution, I want to have this set to lower. So 240 or 10% or 25% should be good. 25 for now should be sufficient. Now we can see what our object is looking like. Okay, so he's getting lit. There's obviously quite a bit of noise inside there. I'm assuming that's coming from the light. We can go and play with. I'm gonna really crank up the light just to verify that the light's hitting it correctly and see where we're at. Yeah, that's definitely the light. Okay. So I'm gonna set it back to 500. Oops. Let me make a new perspective. I just want to duplicate my light and give us a different angle of lighting, just so we're not hitting it just from the exact side that we're viewing it from. It's captivating. There we go. So let's go here. I'm going to grab the light, duplicate it. Let's scoot this over here, maybe pull it back a bit. And if you aim it straight at the person, or the item, it's going to flatten them out a bit. So I want to more of a side view. Okay, jump back to regular perspective view, render it out. And we should be able to get some quick renders. That's what we're after. Quick renders, quick renders. That way we can see, okay, it doesn't look good, let's fix it. We hit escape. Grab our first area light, which is our key light. Call it key light. And we'll add a 1 here. And our other light, which is our quill light. Go there, and we put this to 800. You can see, even without having a specular map on this, it does look pretty good already, which is pretty nice looking. Pull this up a little bit more. Put that to 2230. Just want to make sure I'm not blowing them out. No, that's good. Okay. I'm gonna put my other area light. I'm gonna keep my key light and pull that one up too. Alright, so that's looking pretty decent. I'm liking the way this is looking. You can see that cavity map really adding something to the scene. Now I am getting some weird stuff happening on the lips. You can see some of this texture on the lips still didn't come through, and it's actually a hard area to paint. So I can always jump back to Photoshop. I'm going to zoom in on the lip area if I can. Come on, Photoshop. There we go. And if I go to my brush, add another layer in here, grab some of this pink color. I'm just going to fill this with that color there. It's on the inside of the mouth, so it's not going to be a huge deal if it's exactly what we would be seeing. And keep in mind some of this is coming from these. Okay, so we have that's their ambient occlusion, and that's the cavity map. Okay, now we could also make a new layer on top of this and use our clone stamper. Actually, I'll just use a brush. Clone stamps will be a little difficult to use here. See, I can just kind of sample some of this area and just paint right on top of that. And that'll help me kind of blend in this into that surface. There we go. Alright, so that should be good. Alright, I'm just going to resave this out. As a tip, as color 2, no layers, yes, and OK when this next pop-up pops up. Alright, we can jump back to Maya, we can grab our dude again, go to that file, reload it, and then render again, and then what we should have is obviously not that weird stuff happening in the lip area, and we don't. You can tell right away that definitely looks like it's closed off, so you don't really see that weird line that we were seeing before. And we can adjust that for the eyes too. Now my eyeballs are missing, obviously because I didn't export those into this. So, close some windows. Let me save this file. And I'm going to put it inside my scenes. I'll call it character from ZBrush. And now I'm going to go into my other file that I have. Number 3, I believe it was. So this is like my original file that I brought over into ZBrush. So it should have the eyes in there. And all I'm going to do is export the eyes out and then import the eyes into this file. Alright, so there's my eyes. So I'm just going to grab the 2 eyeballs, go to export selection, eyes, eyes 2, because I already have an eyes 1. I'm going to reopen my other one, character from ZBrush, and then just import those eyes. Okay, now you can tell they're a tiny bit off. just because of where my model ended up kind of being tweaked. So let's push that in a bit. There we go. And I'm just going to assign this just a plain Mia. And I'm just going to take the color of black. Alright, so now save, render this again, and then I can see what the eyes are going to look like. In this case, I just want the eyes just to have this dark, kind of ominous look to them. I can probably pull their reflectivity up a bit. And I'll label these eyes, Mia. Pull that up. Just grab one eye and render it out and see. Pull the glossiness down some. Look at it from a different angle. Sometimes viewing these from different angles will definitely help see what's happening in your scene. And it might just need some color. It might just be just the black here just not cutting it. So I'll give it a tad bit of color. There we go. Switch back to my perspective view, switch back to this. And I'm not going to leave them gray. I can give them a color. For now, I'm just darkening them just so I can see the rest of the model. All right. Alright, so there's my alien guy. Now we can play with some other stuff inside here. So I did go back to ZBrush and I re-exported out my normal map. You can see this is definitely smoother. I just set the subdivision level in that normal map export area to 1 and just told it to smooth out the normals, and that took care of it. Okay, so it's just an option. It says smooth normals, and another option took it down to the first subdivision level. So that will definitely help add some realism to this character, but again, we got some other stuff we got to play with. What we're going to do is take this and make it an actual better looking material. So we're going to go to assign new material, and we're going to go down here to mental ray, Maya fast simple, MASS fast simple. There. We're going to say use selected. And in my render settings, one thing I have to set up here is I have to lower this resolution. Even though we picked 8x10, this is going to use this. So I changed this to 480 by 600, and what that's going to do is make it render a bit quicker than it would typically. Okay, now this has a lot of different settings here, so let's go through them and kind of set them up as we go. If I just hit the render button now, there we go. What we should get is this orangey looking character. Might be a little washed out. Yeah, looking pretty white looking because he's pretty washed out. Okay, now what he wants to have is a light coming from behind it to help kind of guide some light into the surface. So I'm going to switch my view. I'm going to duplicate this light here, hit T, and then bring it to the back here. Okay. Now that light I don't want visible, so I'm just going to go to mental ray and turn off visible so I don't see it. I'm also going to make this one a bit bigger. Alright, let's see, I'm just going to angle this a little bit further, like that. Alright, so now I'm going to render it again and see what we're going to get. Now it does take a few seconds to render. If you kept your setting at 8x10, it's going to take a lot longer to render. So I changed my resolution here so it's back to camera settings because I just changed it in the render view. Alright, so there we go. Alright, so not a huge difference, a little bit of difference there. Let's save this image, and then let's change some of our settings. So on this Mia Fast, you can see this. We have these radiuses. So this one's set to 10, and these are set to 10. Okay, now my object here is not 10 units big. If I scaled my object up, he would be. So I'm going to set this front radius to maybe 1, my back radius to maybe 2. Just trying something out. Okay, and then we're going to see what we get. So let's save the image, which I did. Let's render it again. And what we're trying to do is pull some of this back color further up into him. Alright, so let's go here. Okay, so you can see we actually kind of diminished some of that subsurface scattering property. Alright, so let's take this light that's in the back, let's crank it up a bit more. So maybe I'll add a 1 in here. And what the other thing we can do is take this back weight a little bit more, make the front a little bit more. So I have it at about 2 and 5 now. 2 for the front and 5 for the back radius and depth. These are typically tied together. You know, that brighter light and these kind of coming up a bit, we should start to see more of that. Okay. Now there's a formula you can use for this, but as a beginner, it's usually kind of best just kind of see what the numbers are doing. Each file is going to be different, so you want to play around with it and experiment. Alright, so playing with it a little bit more, you can see that I've taken this and kind of pulled it up a little bit more. Alright, so I played with the light a little bit more. I took my back radiuses up to 10 and 10. My front is still at 2, and this gives me this kind of glowy look, and that's what I was kind of after. Alright, so now let's use our file. So I'm going to go to my overall and diffuse, and I like to just map my color to it. Okay, just so you can see what the color is going to do, let's render it with just the 1. And you'll see it has a slight effect, but not overpowering. Alright, so that's it with just on that one item, and you can see how, you know, it looks pretty nice. I like to take this filter type also to off, and that should, you know, if there's any smoothing going on, it'll take care of that smoothing, get rid of it. I could also add it to the diffuse color. So we'll drop color on there too. And it's always good to save the image with this button, do a render, compare, see if what you're doing is improving the image or taking away from it. Okay. For some of these things, you know, I could use just the overall or just the diffuse. Remember, we're trying to create a look. We're not necessarily trying to get the exact image we had inside ZBrush. We're using more advanced stuff to create more of that final look. So we want to be very careful with what we're doing. If this starts to get a little bit too funky looking, we can adjust it. So there it is, kind of more of a natural color, and this is more of, you know, more of an orangey kind of color. So you can see the effects of adding this information in there. So then I'm going to go down to my specular layer, and you'll see there's a specular color here, and there's a shininess. Okay, and this goes from 0 to 100, and 33 is the default. Okay, so what I want to do is use this as a way to control my specularity. So I'm going to go back to my face texture. I'm going to duplicate this color, and what I want to do is create a specular map. So inside here, I'm going to go to curves, and I'm going to go to human saturation, take the saturation all the way down like that. I'm going to add an invert. There we go. And then the curves is the last thing. And this is where we're going to go and adjust it so that we have essentially that kind of thing looking where our specularity is. Okay. Now we can adjust all these too. I can go into a new layer, and just by painting black on that layer, and then setting this to be a multiply, I can basically darken some of these areas. It might be a little bit too much. Okay. Or I can just take down some of these effects. Like here's the curve. Maybe I can just take the curves down some too. Okay. So lots of different things we can do to get this kind of effect. Let's save this as a TIFF. I'll save it as specular 2 without the layers. Then we'll come back into Maya, and on that specular color, we'll add that specular 2. So what I should do is just make like the white areas glossy, so we don't get these big white strips of light on him. So the mouth, basically, and the eyes, those are typically areas that are greasy, usually like the T-zone. Girls know what that is, right? Your forehead, eyebrow area, and then your nose, usually oilier. And again, this isn't anything that's going to be locked in stone. It was always something to come back and play with. You can see like right here, that looks weird having this big gash right there. It's probably coming from this area, or that area. Okay, a way to find out is we can say, okay, well I know it's like this, these faces here. So if I grab those, I go to the UV texture editor, and I see it's this bottom row. Okay, so that's where it's coming from, is this bottom row right here, just too bright. Now, I may not want to adjust everything, I may want to adjust just that. But I have to keep in mind that this bottom row here is also lined up with this row there. So I have to be very careful with how I play with that. So for now, I'm just going to leave it. I may adjust it later. I may, it may work out perfect. I'm going to go to the bump map and click on bump. Go to File. And I'm going to add in that normal map. So inside my color, I have that normal map I exported. It's the one that's the colorful one, the NM one. We'll render it again. And you'll see how all of these are just kind of adding up to that final image of what this character is looking like. Alright, so this is the result of that. And you can see that this doesn't line up, maybe it lines up perfectly. It looks like this line is kind of crossing here, and then that's there. So that's kind of odd. Looks a little bit glassy also. Now, we could adjust some of these parameters, like how much bump depth we have. But we can also adjust this using adds bump. Now, this one is set to just bump. Okay. This next one, I set it to use as an object space normal, and you can see we get different results. Okay. The glossiness is pretty much gone from this one. Now, we could go back and adjust glossiness and tweak some of that. The final one here is setting this to tangent space normal, and you can see we get, again, different results. So I think I'm going to go with this one, the bump map one. Set that to off. And then I'm going to go back to my shininess. I'm going to set that to 1. And we'll see what we get. Alright, so this is the shininess up at 200. Okay, so you can see there's a default, there's 1, there's 200. So again, you kind of want to play with these just to see what settings you're going to like. Okay, so this is looking pretty decent. Let me take the bump down a bit. Instead of it being 1, I'll make it 0.5. Okay, now all of this detail will come up a little bit more on the final render because we're working at a bigger resolution. Okay, so this is pretty much it, where we can really start to play with this. Now there's other stuff that we can do. Here's some other ideas for, here's a bump map, here's a normal map, which is what we're dealing with here. Here's a subsurface scattering map. Here's a color map, which is what we dealt with. Here's a reflection map. So there's other stuff that we could actually add to this to make it appear a little bit more realistic. Right now, it's basically using these two colors as its front and back scattering colors, okay? And then it's just adding this on top of it. So just to give you an idea, if I were just to change these to green, our character would actually have kind of like a green undertone inside of him. So you can see how he has this like green, sickly undertone inside of him, and that's, can be a neat thing to have set up, but we want to do something else. So this is specular, so let's just call this specular. Again, we can come back and play with this and adjust it and whatever else. I'm going to duplicate the color one again. I'm going to call this subsurface scattering. Okay, now this one's going to be a bit trippy looking. I'm going to take the hue and saturation and I'm going to pull it up. I essentially want to create like a red version of this thing. Okay. Go to my curves. Like that. I'm pulling this down like that. Swap my hue and saturation a bit. I can also go to my reds and just pull my reds up too. There we go. Taking that hue down in the master really gave me into the red zone. Get a little opacity down. Take the curves. Pull that down some. Okay, so this is essentially like what's underneath the skin. So let's go to save as a TIFF. And we'll call this subdermal 2. No layers. Back to Maya. And just go to the back button. Go to subdermal 2. Let's drop both of those on there for now. I can create individual maps. I can make one a bit redder than the other one. And seeing how we're changing the look of this just by adjusting some of these maps. Okay, so let's go back to this. I'm going to duplicate the SSS. I'm going to add a levels on top of this, or a curves. I'm just going to really darken it. Let's try curves on this one. All right, let's try that. Alright, so there's my backscatter. I just wanted it dark, so I'll play with it until it got dark. TIFF, backscatter, and I just go back to my backscatter, click on my new button, click on the backscatter. And any of these that I see, I can adjust any of the properties. So if I'm seeing, like, it looks like he has eyebrows, I didn't want him to have eyebrows. So I can come back into my texture, find out where the eyebrows are coming from. Most likely coming from the subsurface scattering here. And I can turn it off. Most likely it's the ambient occlusion. So you see how I just get rid of that? It's good. I do the same thing on this. Get rid of that. Ambient occlusion. And then it won't look like we have eyebrows. Dark there. Alright. So just save this again. This one is the SSS copy, which is the backscatter. No layers, yes. Yes. Okay. Now this one is my subdermal. No layers, yes, and yes. So you can see the idea of what we're doing here is that we have these maps that are controlling it. Even on the specular, maybe I don't want this to be there. Alright, so I can just go back into these and say, let's reload that. Reload this. Reload that. Bump should be fine. I'll save my image, render it again. You can see from like images like this, it's kind of good to have, you know, hanging up so you can get an idea. Here's the subdermal, there's the backscatter, there's normal, there's displacement, diffuse, specular, gloss, overall roughness, reflection. You know, more maps you have correctly, the better your object's going to turn out. So you can see the eyebrows are gone, it just looks like shadows under them now. Okay, so we can always go back to this too and change stuff like the color. So if we don't like the original color, it's like to duplicate just in case I mess it up. Or like vibrance, you know, make it more vibrant, maybe saturate a little bit more. We can always go to hue and saturation and take his color to a different color. Maybe his natural skin tone is something like this. Now we can go back to that and just reload his color. And save it. Oops. Save the image, re-render, and then try it out and see what it's going to look like. Maybe we go to those subdermals and then the other ones and give that more of a green tint too. We could do that as well. We could do that to the whole mess of things, just having it way up here, you know, instead of just doing it to these layers. I can make a hue and saturation and pull this all into the green area. Alright, so there's, with the adjustments on there, having them a bit darker, we're getting a little bit more glossiness, so then we can come down here to the shininess and maybe play with that, okay? Or come back to Photoshop and maybe just darken this up some. Let's put levels on this. There we go. Specular 2. No layers. Yes. Reload. And it's going to be this back and forth game of just playing with all of these different maps and trying to get the right look that you're going after. Okay? And doing it just flat coloring, you can see we're not going to be able to get those good results. It's a matter of playing with this until we get good results. Updated. Alright, well, we can keep playing with this, for hours. So I'm going to just go back here. I'm going to save this document. It's saving. I'm going to open up my other one. Alright, so here's what the end product of mine is looking like, and then I'll walk you through the rendering process of it. Okay, so here the texture is pretty flat looking on him because I wanted something a little bit more, this looks pretty human, so I actually like downplayed a lot of the texture so it just didn't come out like crazy detailed. And then I had another one too. There's that one. No, I had another one. I deleted it. Okay. So, so this is where this guy started. You can see he has a lot more stuff in there, and I kind of softened that effect. A different one. Okay, so here's what we're going to do is render out just the same passes that we've done before. Now we're going to have to do it a little bit differently, but you'll see how it's pretty much the same thing, just another step. I'm going to grab all my stuff. I'm going to group it. There we go. I'm going to go over here to not display layers but render layers. I'm going to click on this twice. This one is going to be color. This one is going to be AO. Now I'm going to right click on AO. Come on. And go to attributes. And in here I'm going to go to presets and say occlusion. And what this is going to do is it's going to render out the ambient occlusion just like this. Okay, pretty cool. We can go to this arrow here, and we can go to the spread, and we can adjust the spread just like we've done before. So making it 2 or 5 or whatever it is, we'll spread that out more. Okay. Max distance will allow us to control how tight it is. So taking the spread to 0.25 with a max distance of 1, you can see we don't get very much. Make it the max distance 1, or the spread 1 and the max distance 1. You can see where it's ending up. Okay. So again, stuff we can play with. I'm going to take the max distance down some. Okay, too little. I'm getting some lines, some weird lines there. I didn't want that. Okay. Taking the samples up to maybe 64. Help smooth out the transitions. There we go. Okay, cool. Everything's good there. Okay, so 5 for my spread, 2 for my max. That's good. And then on the color one, this is just going to be our color, just like we saw a second ago. So in my render settings, I just do everything else the same. So this is going to be perspective. That's this camera I set up. This is going to go back to 8x10. My quality is going to crank up to 2, and that's it. Okay, so I go to render, I go to batch render, and let it render it out. When it's done, I'm going to get 2 images. Let me go here, here, So I'm going to get that one and that one. Okay, so I get that one, and what is this one? Die on me? You died on me. There we go. I'll just use that one for the time being. Alright. No, it's not going to work for the time being. Alright, let's go back to this file that had it. Alright, so let me hide all this stuff. So we have the color and we have the ambient occlusion. Now in this case, I was getting a halo coming around my object. Okay? Let me take these two layers. I'm just going to duplicate the layers to a new comp, just so we did just those. Okay? So I just brought them into the same comp. And I set the AO to multiply. There it is. And then I put a background in. And this is something that I found online. This is a sky background. Like a planetary background. Alright. So you can see what it looks like. And then I blurred it. Okay, and I didn't just use any blur. I used a defocus blur. Okay, so under filter, blur gallery, I did a not a defocus, a field or iris blur. Okay, and what the iris blur does is it blurs it more in line with like an actual camera blurring something. Okay, so you can see how the edges are blurred, but the center is in focus. And I have more settings over here that I could play with. It's thinking. There it is. And you get this circle here, and that's what's going to be in focus, and then you can play with that. Kick me out. I'm going to do that and try it again. Okay. Filter, blur gallery, iris blur. We'll wait for the big circle to show up. There it is. And then we can adjust where this is happening. Okay. You can see the sharpness of this. You can see the rotation. You can see the points of how sharp it's going to be. And then the actual how much blurriness is happening. Okay, so I found something that looked appropriate. And then I said, okie dokie. And I just scooted it in front of the alien so that it didn't look like there was a big focus spot right here. I could have shrunk it down, but I liked the way that it was blurring out, so I didn't touch it. Okay, so the alien, need to set to normal. My ambient occlusion goes on top, and there's a slight discrepancy that you can see. And so what I did was I control-clicked my alien, and I went to my ambient occlusion, and I just put a layer mask on. Okay, now looking at that, I should have cut that off, but it did not. Alright, so we'll just Control-Shift-I, click on this, and delete until it goes away. I'm going to contract it a pixel or two. And then I'm just going to delete this and delete that. Alright, just ignore the white for now. I don't know why it's coming over. It shouldn't be. Alright, so I had that, and then I added a vignette on top of this. So I just went to a new layer. And it's going to take some time because it's such a big file, but I painted some blackness around the outside. It's taking forever. Okay, so I have some darkness going around the outside of this. Then I can just add a regular blur to this. Like a big blur. A lot of pixels. And that helps soften it. And then I can take this to multiply and then take the opacity down until I'm happy with the way that looks. Okay, so there's not too much messing around with this. I mean, it's pretty straightforward of what we've already done. It's just using ambient occlusion, using the other stuff, and there you go. Okay, so then you're just going to save this as your last name alien. So Sarcona _ alien, or whatever you want to call your creature. Make sure you have your layers, make sure it's a PSD, and there you go. Right? So that'll be your character assignment. Now you can enhance this further, like if you wanted, different colors in here. If you want to change the color of your alien, you can go into the hue and saturation and enhance the coloration of your alien some. You can add exposure, let's say. I'm going to clip it just to that. Okay, you could even go in there with the brush on these things and start to paint out some of these areas. Like if you really wanted the head to really stand out from the shoulders, you could paint some of that. You can see on my final one I didn't have this halo thing around it. Again, I'm not sure why it did that. But very simple stuff. I did have some other additional things going on with this one that I was messing around with, but that's essentially it. Okay, so enjoy it.